Okay, welcome to the MediSun podcast. Today I'm joined by Max Gulhane. Super excited to talk to Max today. He was one of the first people I listened to when getting into the quantum circadian health space. So Max, thanks a lot for coming on.
Hey Brett, thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. I wanted to start and just get your perspective on from your background, starting as a conventional medical doctor and then now viewing things a little differently, and kind of get a little insight into your awakening into the whole quantum circadian health aspect of healing.
Yeah, it's been a journey, and the journey started with a conventional medical education, learning about disease, pathology, and really how to treat that disease and pathology. But lacking in that education was more background or context in terms of potentially why that disease arose in the first place, or any investigation or inquiry into what could be done to really prevent the disease from happening. So that was going on in mainstream medical school, and I had my own like health issue, relatively minor on the scale of chronic disease, but it was bothersome nonetheless. I had acne, and
Hmm.
I explored different lifestyle modalities. I guess after finding that the solution that was given to me by my GP, my dermatologist, was just unsatisfactory, in to say the least. It was simply just drugs, drug therapy, topical therapy, and oral therapy for acne, when there wasn't any in-depth conversation about what's actually going on. So I went through self-discovery. I used a low carb diet that really helped. Progressed to a carnivore type diet, and then which felt amazing. And then hit a roadblock, wasn't feeling as good, so kept looking. And when you're ready, there's the pathway kind of opens up in front of you. I think that's what most people find when they go down any kind of intellectual journey. There's always going to be someone ready to serve you up a plate of information. And I've found the work of Dr. Jack Cruz, and that is a smorgasbord of information. And I guess he was my entry point into this idea of the effect of light on health, and these so-called or the quantum biological influences on health and mitochondria. And from there, it's just been, I guess, a ongoing process for me of learning, so I can better understand how to I guess advise patients, treat and advise patients to help them optimize their health, prevent disease, and hopefully cure and prevent disease.
And I think it must be a difficult position for a lot of physicians who they're not privy to a lot of this information and they're trying to fix issues with their patients, but there kind of isn't a means to an end. It's just this rabbit hole, like you're just cycling through different medications. How was like when you started changing your perspective, how are you perceived by other physicians and people you worked with?
Yeah, I think a good analogy. I always think about analogies, and I really like the analogy of a motor mechanic and a car, because as much as what maybe a layperson can understand is this relationship. The mechanic has an obligation to fix a car, and the person who owns the car, let's say they know nothing about mechanics. They don't understand when something should be changed. They don't understand what quality oil or coolant just got put in. That they have to trust the mechanic that what they're being told is the appropriate maintenance period, that the parts need replacing at appropriate times. There's a whole lot of trust there. There's this massive what knowledge asymmetry. And I think the position that modern mainstream doctors have, MDs in this day and age, is that we likewise there is this asymmetry of knowledge. But I think in many ways, there's when it comes to chronic disease prevention and treatment, it's almost like the doctors are reading from the wrong manual. It's like you're trying to fix a a Land Rover Defender, but you've got a Toyota Corolla manual.
Mhm.
and and the outcome is that, the recommendations or the adjustments that are kind of being made again from a pharmaceutically focused, allopathic Western medical point of view isn't giving the best quality advice in my opinion. And it's almost like, but you send out the car out of the garage still kind of blowing smoke, and the owner's kind of looking at it, being like, is this okay? Like, yeah, no, no worries.
Hmm.
Come back to me in another 5 years when the exhaust pipe falls off. And we if you're looking at this at a more preventative health point of view, or at least a root cause, or just someone who wants to make sure that car's running as optimally as possibly, it's like, okay, no, we're not going to tolerate that. That's not kind of good enough.
Hmm.
And I think that's where I'm at the moment. And I think a lot of doctors can't relate because they haven't been through a personal journey. So and that's, you see this in patients, you see this in other colleagues, and until they have to experience disease or illness and find the status quo lacking in its ability to help them, they're kind of going to be, I would say, willfully blind, but just apathetic to these kind of pathways, because they don't need to be. They don't need to know this if they're kind of content in their intellectual lane. And it's very rare that that a doctor does, I guess, come to this through their own means, like as in not through a personal problem. And that's usually a mix of really curiosity and like listening to patients, because if they have patients telling them that they got better, turning off the lights at night, watching the sunrise, taking their shoes off, then it's if you're listening, if the doctor's listening, then they might start inquiring about how that was effective, not dismissing such an anecdote out of hand.
That's a great analogy. And I mean, a lot of pushback that I get just trying to spread this information is that um, there's this blind trust for the medical establishment in general. And I'm like, they haven't really earned that trust, to me, at least. Their body of work isn't great in chronic disease management at all. Um, and I think you made a good point about fixing your own issue. That doctors have to go through something like that to see, because you must have fixed an issue with through a path that no one's ever told you to really do in conventional, education, and so that just opens your eyes. So there's so many possibilities that we're not even looking in the right direction. Um, so when you're trying to not only diagnose but fix a patient that you're working with, what's the first is the base redox, like, is that where you're trying to build up from there?
Yeah, I guess it's going to depend on what their issue is,
Hmm.
and how did they get there? What are their what environmental or genetic factors like predisposed them to get to where they were? What is their like current setup? What is their lifestyle? What are their habits? As comprehensive as possible. But in terms of, once we've identified an issue and we're kind of building up to fix that person, there's not one. Usually, there's not one silver bullet. It's going to be a process of uh, piecing together. It's like a puzzle. I was on we had a retreat the other weekend, and it's simply implementing these circadian health principles and showing people how to kind of live this ideal circadian life. And someone used a really great analogy, which is that of a puzzle. So everyone has got a different puzzle, and the pieces for each person are different size and shape, meaning that there's going to be relative different kind of contribution to their illness of certain lifestyle habits. However, based on the fact that we are all, Homo sapiens, and we all came from this same, genetic lineage, and we had similar evolutionary, adaptations. We all lived on planet Earth. Then I think that there are some basics that apply to everyone. And at the base of this, I mean, you can conceive it however you like. At the moment, I'm thinking about it as a pyramid, and at the base or the foundation of the pyramid is the light and dark cycle. And that's kind of a heretical comment to a lot of people. It's a heretical comment to mainstream medicine. It's a heretical comment to functional medicine doctors who use supplements all the time. And but I'll explain why I think that. And at the bottom, again, when I talk about what I mean by light dark cycle, I think that this compound even further back. So the this hormonal system, the way that the organism interfaces with the environment is is going to dictate how it behaves, not only on a hormonal and biochemical level, but also on a biophysical level. And my premise, or my proposition, which I think is backed up by good science and practical application, is that the um, the light cycles and the light signals are critical in programming the bodily functions and the functions of the organism. So, overarching is essentially just like melatonin and cortisol, which are two extremely important hormones for the coordination of the body's function. And essentially, if we roll our way all the way back before the evolution of eukaryotic organisms, there was melatonin, and it was acting, before it was acting as a signal of an onset of sleep, it was acting as an antioxidant. And obviously, it still has that function. But the point being, and when you're getting into disagreements or arguments about the hierarchy of intervention or lifestyle change, this melatonin hormone and this photoreception, it predated the evolution of a gastrointestinal tract. So before we were even able to digest and assume the cellular components of other organisms for energy, we were, the organisms, the proto organism, before again eukaryotes arose, were receiving light signals and helping them to make sure that they were more likely to survive. And because there was this huge difference in energy availability between night and day. So that's nighttime. I mean, nighttime is a period where this hormone melatonin does get secreted. It's now being, secreted endogenously by the pineal gland, and it kicks off, or it signals a whole bunch of repair processes in the body. And that, from as you choose the cell type or the organ type, and it's all regenerating, but in order for it to regenerate, it needs darkness at night. There was a comment recently. I mean, Jack Cruz made a comment about regeneration of the cone photoreceptors in the eye. I mean, why would what condition like age-related macular degeneration be rising? Amongst other lifestyle changes, well, because the cones need darkness to regenerate, and if everyone's lighting up their rooms at night, then that process of regeneration can't occur. So this darkness process is fundamental. This is why we sleep. It's that fundamental to health, and other people agree with that. I mean, you can talk to, or you get opinions from people like Brian Johnson or Andrew Huberman. They will agree that sleep is important, but I don't think that, especially someone like Brian, hasn't appreciated this in the duality of this light dark cycle. So you can have your sleep optimal, but that's only half of the puzzle when it comes to this foundation of health with respect to circadian biology and light dark cycles, because the yang, sorry, the yin is daytime sunlight, and full spectrum bright daytime sunlight, and essentially in the form that your body would have received. And we can make nuances and allowances for skin type and ancestral origin, and latitude, the latitude that your ancestors evolved. That's also a nuance that needs to be made. But basically, it means from the moment the sun rises until the moment the sun sets, then we were ancestrally and historically exposed to sunlight, and not just just the visible, and not the UV. It was everything. It was everything from 280 nanometers, which is in the ultraviolet B, all the way beyond beyond 5,000, into the far infrared. So that's a huge solar spectrum, of which by by photonic energy, the visible light is the greatest, but by photon count, the non-visible, the infrared has the highest photon count, and then obviously with the UV, the ultraviolet, which again is not visible, is extremely important, even though it makes up less than 5% of solar energy, and UVB, 5% of that. It was indispensable, and the reason why complex life was able to evolve in the first place. So that this whole mix of UV, visible, and near infrared are all indispensable light nutrients that we evolved with, that we need. And yes, we were sitting in shaded trees during peak of midday, or in a forest canopy, making the use of other tools to mitigate the effects of ultraviolet as ionizing radiation. But nevertheless, we weren't in these chambers, sealed chambers that were filtering natural sunlight. We weren't in areas, dim indoor environments. We had full bright daylight. And Michael Moore-Eade, who's one of the circadian biologists and researchers, they put out a paper a couple of years ago, like a position statement, and basically stating that modern existence, like the modern human life today in society, is essentially exposed to because people are spending 95% of their time indoors, exposed to 1,000 times less intensity of bright light compared to essentially what we would have, and 100 times brighter nighttime than we would have. So this the yin and yang, the duality, Taoism is like this duality. It's been disturbed, and it's been disturbed in because as humans we've been able to invent technology that is essentially lighting up our nighttime and cocooning ourselves during the daytime. And the reason why the daytime sunlight is so important is because it, I mean, there's so many facets to this, but it in and of itself is an energy source that the body is deriving, and the mitochondria are deriving uh, energy from. It's what is happening in the mitochondrion is reversal of what's happening in a chloroplast that's photosynthesizing. So the addition of solar light essentially aids in this whole process of oxidative phosphorylation of mitochondrial function. And if you subtract out that solar light, then the mitochondria has a harder time essentially doing its job. And the chronic disease epidemic, I guess, coming back to what we started the conversation with, is different versions of mitochondrial dysfunction or maladaptation, you can call it, depending on which organ it develops in, which is again a function of different lifestyle habits and genetic predisposition. So this is why, and you can measure that daytime. You can actually measure the biochemical amount of daylight sun someone's got by proxy, which is the serum vitamin D level. So if we take a step back and look at these key hormones that influence the organ, your health as a person, vitamin D, melatonin, cortisol, or three of them, they're all intimately tied to light. And they're only just three examples, because the whole of the pituitary gland or hypothalamus and the pituitary gland is all responding to light signals, and the rest of those pituitary hormones are also kicking off secretion at a certain amount of time of day. So in totality, the way that the body is essentially conducting everything that it needs to do is fundamentally reliant on correct timing of daytime and nocturnal darkness. So if we screw that up, and screwing that up is the default for most people most of the time, then we're going to get sick, and those sicknesses, as I just said, metabolic disease and metabolic syndrome being kind of perhaps the most visible or relevant, is all downstream of disturbed mitochondrial function, and that includes insulin resistance. So that's, I guess, why I put the light dark cycle at the bottom of the pyramid.
That was a great explanation, and I'm glad you went with the yin yang direction. So morning light, just to kind of zone in, and bounce off the cortisol. How do you use morning light to correctly build the right cortisol rise and fall, or not fall, but rise and then steady balance throughout the day to manage that cortisol level?
Yeah, so uh, I think whatever in terms of the wake up, like this um the way that the body is supposed to wake up again, which is appropriate is through solar blue light. And the reason is because these special clock recept like non-visual photoreceptors, the clock aspect of your eye, not the vision forming aspect. I'm talking about these intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. They're uniquely susceptible or triggered by blue light. But the key point is that the blue light that they receive, and therefore, that goes on to essentially trigger that cortisol response, is present in the form of natural daylight at sunrise, which in and of itself is approximately a 3-to-1 ratio of non-visible to visible photons. So, and it's completely different to the blue light that you're getting from an iPhone screen or from an iPad screen, which is, a big dirty spike of blue without any form of non-visible red infrared light. And that's that I think that affects the way that the body interprets that morning wake up. And so I guess the key point is that whatever Mother Nature is giving you in your location, at your season, at your latitude, at that time is going to essentially anchor your circadian rhythm and optimize that wake up so that your cortisol level will simply reflect, ideally, with if there's nothing else going on physiologically, an appropriate morning environment.
That's great. And melatonin specifically, the first time I ever heard Jack Kruse say that morning sunlight is going to help you sleep better, it was so counterintuitive to me. I had no clue, had never heard that. So what is that morning light doing to our cellular melatonin? And how is it benefiting us when you get that darkness later at night?
Yeah, so this is a great opportunity to make the point that there is in fact these two kind of repositories, or the body has two separate mechanisms by which it's making melatonin. And the historically the type of melatonin that most are familiar with and most scientists are familiar with is that so-called circulatory or pineal gland melatonin. And the pineal gland, essentially it's a brain structure, and it's a vestige, it's an ancient remnant of a visual receptive system in different species. And it has different anatomical position, and it's actually directly light sensitive. But in the humans, we actually send the blue light signal, goes from that the retinal ganglion cells to the hypothalamus, and then it goes down the superior cervical ganglion to the PVN, and then it goes to the pineal gland. And that signal of blue light essentially turns off melatonin, and that's an appropriate reaction to the reception of blue light, and therefore would kick off the dark cycle, would kick off the sleep cycle. So that is the one, the main source of melatonin that most of us are aware of. And possibly that's kind of mopping up oxidative stress that's occurred during the day. But it also happens, and this is a more recent discovery by Zimmerman and Russell Ryder, maybe 5 years ago, was that the mitochondria is actually also making melatonin on site, essentially right there in the mitochondrion, but only on stimulation of near infrared light. So it seems like your body's making on demand melatonin, again because it's an antioxidant, to essentially cool down the heat damage. Think about it that way. That's being done by just the engine idling. So just think about when you're driving your car and you're pushing the accelerator pedal, or you're even leaving it idling. You're creating these reactive oxygen species in in the mitochondria. And yes, they have a role. They have a role in signaling and these biophoton production, but they can also, if not adequately balanced with an antioxidant force, they can cause oxidative damage and therefore damage to the mitochondrial DNA, and therefore, the cellular energy output will drop over, periods of years. So the melatonin that's getting made on site in the mitochondrion is almost like a, a, a coolant, like an engine coolant that the body is using then and there to help mitigate the oxidative stress of uh of the body. So there's these two pools. There's these two ways that the body is making and using melatonin, and really what we want to do is maximize both both pools. So it specifically to maximize the daytime on-site melatonin, you just preferably spend your time outdoors and again close to bushes, natural greenery, shrubbery, because again, Fosbury and Zimmerman's work shows that green plants essentially reflect these near infrared photons, and therefore they can be used. And it seems to be some extremely interesting anatomical adaptations that the body's made, specifically with respect to skin physiology, brain, the sulci and gyri of the brain, as well as the actual refractive index of human amniotic fluid of the pregnant woman, to concentrate these near infrared photons into these really important areas of the brain and body and spinal cord. So that it's absolutely essential, and we can maximize that by simply just getting outside and being near natural greenery. But then to maximize the pineal or the circulatory melatonin, then that is essentially programmed by early morning sun exposure, and even into the UVA rise throughout the early morning time. And the more because of essentially the photochemistry of these chemicals, these compounds, the more ultraviolet light you can get during the day, essentially that is setting up the body to prime and then release melatonin from the pineal gland, to several hours after darkness. So people might, if you've gone camping, you've gone out, we call it the bush here, you guys, I don't know what you call it over there. If you go out to the bush and you spent the whole day outside, you're hiking, you're climbing, whatever you're doing, and you have a small campfire and you cook dinner, you've eaten before sunset because the sun's gone down, and you just sit down, you get this wave of tiredness. It's your body's starting to dump melatonin into the system, and because of there's so little artificial light in at night out there when you're camping. I mean, nowadays people bring generators and they turn on, all kinds of LED contraptions on their camper vans. But I'm talking about if you've walked in, then you will fall asleep, and you'll fall asleep like an absolute log, because that melatonin hormone is assisting in the onset of sleep.
That's great. And I think like a great point that you're emphasizing here is that being inside is basically stealing energy by not getting it from your environment. And then when you're outside, it's just so energy rich. Everything is wanting to put energy into the system to make you run correctly. And I think it's so prevalent today. You just see, like, you can see that they look like an inefficient energy system. Like everything about them. Even when Jack Kruse talks about how inefficient energy systems expand. And it just, I think that really highlights the obesity epidemic that's worldwide today.
Yeah, great, absolutely great point. And I've been thinking the pretty much the same thing, which is every and again, not to sound too extreme, because the process of implementing a circadian lifestyle can sometimes become a bit overwhelming if people try to go from woe to go, and they think it's too hard. But essentially every moment you're inside behind artificial behind a tinted window or under artificial light is essentially you're depriving your mitochondrial colony of energetic input they need to essentially operate efficiently. And we talk about there's a lot of talk about longevity this, longevity that. Brian Johnson, don't die. The crux of not dying is essentially the slowest decline possible of the energetic capacity of your mitochondrial colony.
Mhm.
What that essentially means is you essentially want to slow down the process of mitochondrial um, decay as much as you can to prevent you from dying. And obviously, some of the main causes of death in society are neurological and cardiological, and various flavors of neurodegenerative disease, stroke, ischemic heart disease, or heart attack, heart failure. And it also happens that these organs are the most are up there with the most mitochondrial dense tissues in the body. So if we're trying to preserve or reduce the likelihood of death by neurodegeneration, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, um, or heart failure or heart attack, then we really want our mitochondria working as optimally as possible. And it's like money on the table.
Mhm.
If you're simply being outside, your body doesn't even have to do anything, and it's essentially able to use that red light to spin the ATPase and essentially suck glucose out of the bloodstream, uh, and just run more efficiently and essentially optimize all functions. And what I think about, and as for me as a personal journey and evolution in my understanding of thinking about diabetes and metabolic disease as a dietary uh, a problem of excess dietary carbohydrate and processed food components, to when you're understanding what's going on with how light is interacting with the mitochondria, then you realize that sure, the food is absolutely making the problem worse. I mean, people guzzling down ultra processed, sugar sweetened beverages and high fructose beverages. Absolutely, that's a problem. But when you learn that the red light is simply able to reduce blood glucose levels by 27% in that Glenn Jeffrey trial from beginning of last year, then it's almost like daylight is this constant anti-diabetic stimulus that you can access for free, that is putting constant pressure, downward pressure on rising blood glucose levels in response to food. So absolutely, people are going to become necessarily dependent on a low carb or carnivore diet if they're never getting outside, because they're not giving their mitochondria any leeway to essentially process carbs. And any moment they shove carbs into the system, because they're so sunlight deprived, that they'll get a glucose spike and put down visceral fat and become, over a period of months, pre-diabetic. So the root cause wasn't the carbohydrates per se. It was the fact that they were not outside and not eating latitude, location specific, seasonally appropriate carbohydrate.
I completely agree. And in that study, I believe they shined it right on like the shoulder or something, right? It wasn't even full body red light. So it's or infrared light. So it's I mean, like you said, it's just money on the table. You can really improve your health just by being outside. And I noticed it a lot. I was in northern New Hampshire and it's in the summer there's so much greenery there that it's just like you feel absolutely amazing if you spend any amount of time outside. It's just reflecting and it's like it's forest bathing. It really is. But to move on with a higher energy photon with UV light, and we'll start with the benefits of UV light. What is someone missing if they're not getting out and getting midday sun exposure? And that's obviously if it's prefaced with morning sun exposure.
Yeah, so a couple of different angles to, I guess, get appreciate this on, maybe like the biophysical, biochemical, starting and starting from the, maybe we'll just quickly go talk about the biophysical benefits. Is the UV light appears to via its absorption on by melanin, this pigment melanin seems to be able to essentially liberate electrons from water using the power of ultraviolet light. So again, in terms of what that means for the cellular health and the cell, is that it's suddenly able to access a whole much bunch more of more energy, perhaps even in a distinct and different way to the near infrared mechanism we just mentioned, by just simply being outside and having ultraviolet light. So, again, the more melanin you have, the more potentially you can derive benefit from this energy source without getting sunburn. The From a biochemical level, there's lots of different ways of, I guess, conceiving about um, the benefits of ultraviolet light. But maybe it's first best to illustrate how important this process is, because the simply the one of the photo products of UV light is an endorphin product. So an endorphin chemical, and that's via this pro-opium melanocortin axis, this pathway, is that it UV light, when it strikes the skin, when it strikes the eyes, it up regulates, or it facilitates the transcription, translation, and cleavage of pro-opium melanocortin into all these melanocortin peptide hormones, and they are intimately required for in the skin for the tanning response. So the reason why the melanocyte, which is this little dendritic-like cell that sits in the basal layer of your skin, why that's able to make the melanin pigment is because it received a message from this alpha MSH that was made in the keratinocyte in the skin cell, and essentially signaled to the melanocyte to make more pigment. And that's yes, it's an adaptive response. Let's not sugarcoat it. That occurs after there's been DNA damage to the skin cell. But what it sets in motion is a beneficial hormetic adaptive response, if obviously if people don't continually stay out there. And I guess this is the crux of hormesis, is that there's benefit in intermittent dosing, not in constant dosing. If you have intermittent dosing, then you allow the organism to respond favorably. So amongst these products of POMC, and as I mentioned, include alpha MSH, the endorphins, ACTH, which is essentially the precursor to cortisol. And if you one of the other pioneers in photobiology is Dr. Alexander Wunsch, and he explains about the function of these skin-derived catecholamine hormones, and because interestingly, not only ACTH gets produced, but a whole bunch of other essentially like pituitary-like hormones get made by the skin. But one of the reasons is because the ultraviolet light and short wavelength visible like blue light is able to vasodilate the skin and the blood vessels under the skin, causing a redistribution of blood peripherally to the surface. So that has enormous benefits. It obviously improves blood flow, and therefore reduces blood pressure, improves all these markers of cardiovascular health and cardiovascular physiology. But the other reason why this ACTH and cortisol release occurs is to essentially prevent excessive redistribution of the circulation to the periphery. So we want a little bit, but too much is not good. But thankfully, the body has got this extremely elegant system to deal with that and appropriately, manage that. So, what is UV light doing with this POMC compound and with the vitamin D system? Because the vitamin D system is another like kind of critical insight into the benefits of UV light, and that again was initially thought to only be a story of bone metabolism and calcium and phosphate absorption, and that's its kind of base function, which is if you avoid being frankly deficient, then you prevent rickets, you prevent osteomalacia, and long term you can help prevent osteoporosis. But that is only part of the story. I mean, you can, if you get someone above 30 nanograms per mil or 75 nanomoles per liter serum vitamin D level, then you're gonna safely prevent those bone complications. But what happens above that, above 40 nanograms per mil or above 100 nanomoles per liter, is that you get all these non-skeletal benefits of vitamin D. And we're at the point now that the literature around vitamin D and health has ballooned, meaning that we've investigated, people have investigated the absolute gamut of health conditions, from preeclampsia in pregnancy to cardiovascular disease to all cause mortality to breast cancer, colorectal cancer, multiple sclerosis, type 1 diabetes, you name it. Like any of these diseases that we've seen massive rises in the modern world, if you essentially you can find an association with low vitamin D and these diseases. And really the takeaway point, or the key point here, is that you can just substitute sunlight deficiency in the place of a vitamin D deficiency, because every time you see vitamin D insufficiency or deficiency, the only way, or the most important way the body is making that fat soluble hormone, because that's what it is actually a hormone, is through UVB exposure. And yes, you can get it from certain dietary sources, but for most people, most of the time during most of human history, the sun was our greatest source, from 280 nanometers to 320 nanometer light. So, and again, if you see the term vitamin D deficiency, then you can again substitute it with sunlight deficiency. And the root cause of that problem is not purified cholecalciferol from the pharmacy. That's not
Mhm.
the disease process. That's not the problem. The
Mhm.
the problem is that that person has not been in full spectrum sunlight, because the vitamin D marker, the 25 hydroxy vitamin D assay that you get measured from a venous blood draw, can be thought of as a proxy or a marker of that person's ultraviolet, visible, and near infrared sun exposure. And the reason why we know that um, is because often some of these intervention trials that have relied on vitamin D supplementation haven't been able to replicate the findings that we get from these long-term observational studies. And there's some other reasons why that maybe those studies weren't done as fairly as they could have been. But I guess the key point is that um, these health benefits are downstream of full spectrum sunlight, which necessarily includes UV. And we can't thrive without UV light, but we just have to be sensible, and we have to be respect our ancestry and the ultraviolet conditions that we're living in when we get UV light. And it's not about burning. It's not about toasting ourselves like some English tourist in Byron Bay, who hops off the plane,
Yeah.
looking like a lobster, the next day. That's not the point. But it's about nuance, and it's about sensible exposure.
There's so much nuance around it. I think it's important for people to know too that the more fair skin you are, the easier for it is for you to absorb vitamin D. Um, and I was just curious, in clinical practice, how often do you see people who are vitamin D deficient, and how often is that also related to them having some sort of chronic disease?
Yeah, great question. So the body will consume vitamin D. Vitamin D will get essentially get used up in the process of dealing with inflammation and responding to infection. And the way to think about vitamin D is that it's almost like it. If you have a high vitamin D level, if you're replete with vitamin D, then essentially turns your whole immune system from pro-inflammatory to essentially anti-inflammatory. The way I explain it is, it's like if the body's vitamin D deficient, its immune system is going to have its fists up. It's going to be ready to respond to essentially benign environmental allergens. That's these atopic diseases like asthma and eczema and allergic rhinitis. And it's also going to be at the same time less effective at essentially dealing with viral and bacterial infections. So we know this not only mechanistically, but we know this epidemiologically, because you can plot the severity of flu seasons and seasonal viral and respiratory infection against time of year, and they coincide with the nadir of the population's vitamin D level, which obviously is coinciding with the nadir in sun exposure habits. Um, and to some degree potentially vitamin D availability. But the what you're saying is absolutely correct, which is if you look at patients, I mean, I had a lovely old lady with temporal arteritis or giant cell arteritis, which is an autoimmune vasculitis, and you measured her vitamin D, and it's in a boots, severely deficient, and it's a factor that was undoubtedly playing a role in the development of that disease. And there's factors that influence our ability to kind of maintain our vitamin D level, particularly obesity. And the work of Michael Holick has shown that if you're obese, you need 2 to 3 times the amount of vitamin D to essentially maintain the serum level. But absolutely, if we can avoid that state of vitamin D deficiency, then a whole bunch of potentially inflammatory chronic diseases would not manifest, and because of the beneficial effect of the vitamin D system per se, but also sunlight and those other mechanisms on the health and disease prevention.
It makes perfect sense. Even like autoimmune disease is so rampant. It's like your immune defense is up. Literally, it's you're gonna even fight itself. Um, but so what is pharmaceutical vitamin D lacking? Like why do you, aside from all the benefits of being out in natural sunlight, but why is that version of vitamin D not doing the same thing as what you get from UVB exposure?
Okay, fantastic question. So there's a way to think about this. So if we contrast sunlight-derived vitamin D to a supplemental vitamin D, so there, and a quick explainer of the physiology of vitamin D. So what happens is that vitamin D is a compound that gets made by the conversion of cholesterol in the skin to vitamin D, and that process then undergoes the confirm. It basically changes the structure of a ring structure in 7D hydrocholesterol, and that process it changes that ring structure, and then vitamin D is essentially created, and then it essentially isomerizes and binds to a carrier protein. If this is if you're generating in the skin, so UV light hits the skin, turns the cholesterol into a vitamin D. The vitamin D changes conformation, binds to this vitamin D binding protein, and then it actually gets transported by that binding protein to the liver, where it gets hydroxylated and that or enzymatically transformed, and then again into in the same another step happens in the kidney. So the advantage of this, and we'll start right at the skin layer, is that vitamin D is not the only compound that actually gets made on exposure to UVB light. It turns out, and we originally thought that these chemical cousins were actually benign, but if you keep exposing that vitamin D chemical compound to ultraviolet light, then it actually starts making these chemical cousins of vitamin D, I call them, or these secosteroid compounds, which turn out to have other related but highly important effects, such as upregulating DNA repair, so helping the DNA fix any damage that was done by the ultraviolet light. It helps reduce cell proliferation. So in conditions like cancer or psoriasis, where there's excess cell proliferation, these secosteroids are helping to dampen that process down. So you won't make any of these if you're only taking isolated vitamin D3, cholecalciferol. Whereas again, when you made it from sunlight, you're generating not only vitamin D but all its related cousins. And then compare that to supplemental vitamin D, which is cholecalciferol or D3 by itself. So that is ingested. It majority gets bound to the LDL fraction, the lipoprotein fraction, and it's carried around that way, and it's therefore bioavailability or its absorption and its utilization is less. Another interesting study that Michael Holick did was had a couple groups and gave one group a minimal erythemal dose of UV light, in a tanning bed, and gave another group 10,000 units of vitamin D orally, and then measured the vitamin D levels. And what he showed is that the people who ingested the supplement had this like big rise and then fall. And whereas the people who generated in the skin essentially had a more consistent and prolonged release of vitamin D into their circulation. So essentially, if you are getting it from sunlight, you're making a whole bunch more factors than just plain old D3, and you are essentially optimizing it for the body's use and absorption, which is critical.
It's a great explanation. And I wanted to just pivot slightly into because UV light catches so much flack for skin damage and people are and its association with skin cancer. Um, I just wanted your take because I know I've listened to you on previous podcasts and you uh you have a great explanation of this process. So when is UV light damaging and when is it become concerning? And what are the misconceptions about UV light and skin cancer?
Yeah, great question, because I think that the main reason that's holding more people back from getting sensible, safe sun exposure that they need for their health is a fear, and the fear of skin cancer. And so to think about skin cancer, it is cancer just like any other cancer. And what that means is there's got to be a lot of derangements in the body's physiology, in the correct functioning of the body for a malignancy to form. Like off the bat,
Hmm.
there has to be things. Cancer doesn't form in someone who is essentially healthy, who has intact, optimal mitochondrial function, is having this dialed in circadian cycle of darkness at night, and appropriate daylight. So and who has intact mitochondrial power redox. So
Hmm.
who's not insulin resistant, who's not vitamin D deficient. And the funny thing about that is that the person that I've just described is in the vast minority. I mean, you less than 1% of people on the earth fit that bill. But the key point when it comes to skin cancer is that uh, there's a lot going wrong for skin cancer to develop. The distinction needs to be made between the melanoma and non-melanoma skin cancers. And the reason is because the non-melanoma skin cancers, which are squamous cell and basal cell carcinoma, they are they can be cosmetically very troubling. They can be unsightly, and they can be absolutely a problem. Metastatic squamous cell more than basal cell, but these on the whole are not a cause of death. They're not a cause of death in the way that other cancers are. So much so that cancer registries don't even record SCCs and
Hmm.
BCCs. So, from a public health and a optim population health level, we need to think about what is killing people. Well, it would be the malignant melanoma, and malignant melanoma is a problem of those melanocytes that make the melanin pigment essentially replicating and becoming malignant. They can metastasize. They metastasize to the brain, and it's a very sad process. I think the key to an insight that people might find interesting in the context of what we've talked about is the treatment for metastatic melanoma at the moment, and that is immunotherapy. So, the current standard of care when it comes to treating someone with malignant melanoma is these checkpoint inhibitor medications that essentially assist in the immune system to find, detect, and kill melanoma. So that really gives you an insight into what's actually going on. It turns out that it's a problem of insufficient immune surveillance and destruction of malignant cells. And the reason is because right now, or in everyone's body, we're developing malignancies. There's errors in DNA replication in cells. But if your immune system works, your cells will identify, destroy them before they can form a tumor. So that problem is obviously gone awry in patients that develop malignant melanoma. But the mechanism of benefit of these immune checkpoint inhibitor drugs implies that that is a patient who has a defective immune response. And if you look at this multiple other ways, you get insight, which is um, those with the lowest vitamin D levels have the most invasive melanomas. They have the greatest Breslow thickness. They all that's also been shown with basal cell carcinomas. They're more thicker, they're more aggressive. So that's an interesting question. That's I guess a paradox that a doctor needs to, someone can send this to their doctor and they can ask them this question, which is, why is the invasiveness and aggressiveness of melanoma uh, so much greater in those patients who are vitamin D deficient? And if you tie that into what we just talked about, the effects of, say, of vitamin D and the corticosteroids on stopping cell replication, and essentially changing the immune response from pro-inflammatory to, less I wouldn't say anti-inflammatory, but I'd say immune tolerant, then it starts making sense. And then you also think about the life cycle of someone who develops a malignant melanoma. And typically, and obviously Australia and New Zealand, this is the highest incidence of per capita of melanoma in the world. I will tell you, I'll give you an insight into the typical patient story. And it's someone who is a Fitzpatrick 1 or 2, so a pale, they're of Northern European descent. They live in Queensland or New South Wales here in Australia. They potentially have had some burning sunburn in their youth and adolescence, maybe early adulthood. And then the rest of their life, they work inside. They work in an office job. Maybe they're an accountant, they're a lawyer. They're covered up. Most of their body is covered up most of the time for 2, 3, 4 decades. And then the average age of onset of melanoma here is 68 in men. So you've got maybe a 40 or 50-year lag time, in which time that person has avoided sunlight, so they're vitamin D deficient or insufficient. They've eaten all manner of processed food and developed visceral fat and insulin resistance. They have not done any of these. They haven't been outside constantly. They haven't got the benefits of infrared light. Then again, have had a disrupted circadian rhythm, which is key for the cancer surveillance and response process. And then they get diagnosed with a malignant melanoma in a non-sun exposed area. And I've seen it. I've diagnosed myself a melanoma in situ on a farmer's forearm. And I asked him personally, I said to him, does that area get sun exposure? He said it hasn't been exposed to the sun in 20 years.
Wow.
So I'm giving hope to give the audience an insight into the discrepancies here between this really simplistic, reductive sun equals melanoma narrative, because it's wrong. It's not correct. Now, are there certain types of melanoma that are associated with total sun exposure? Yes, that's true. So lentigo maligna happens on the face, shoulders in elderly people, say a farmer, again, who is from Northern Europe. They get it at age 80, 85, after their whole life. It's an indolent, mostly less likely to metastasize type of melanoma. So, this is just some nuance that I think we need to carry into this discussion. And the real problem, I think, is the insufficient exposure for most people. And that's because the diseases that could be prevented through healthy, safe, consistent sun exposure, ischemic heart disease, reduced or massively improved, cancers, bowel, prostate, breast, any of the neurodegenerative diseases, they would be massively improved. You have neuromelanin, Parkinson's disease, loss of neuromelanin in the substantia nigra. So, if we're looking at this on a balance beam, where we're mostly concerned about these diseases that are killing people, compared to skin cancer, but in Australia, I'm not sure about the US, skin cancer is responsible the 13th cause of years of potential life loss, and obviously at the top of barring suicide and death by misadventure and traumatic injury, it's those conditions that I mentioned previously. So again, at a population level, we need to think about this in a more holistic way. On an individual level, we need to know, what is my family history? Do I have a strong family history of melanoma? Am I fair-headed redhead? What else is going on? Because that will give us more nuance on an individual level. But on a societal level, we clearly need to move the balance beam from sun avoidance extremism a bit more towards healthy, regular, non-burning sun exposure.
That's a great explanation. And it's just to tie a bow on it, it's like you're raising your chance of all of these other things just to avoid a very like you said, like that the patient who had, the farmer with melanoma at 80, you know. It's just I agree, we have to shift the beam a little bit just to even if meet somewhere in the middle, you know. But I don't want to take too much of your time. Uh,
That's all.
oh, sorry, go
I
ahead.
just want to make a, Brent, I'll just make the mention. The other key point is photo aging in terms of
Yes.
the resistance to sun exposure, and I think the key point here is that based on the amount of melanin that you have in your epidermis in your skin will dictate how much exposure is appropriate.
Hmm.
And people whose ancestors are from West Africa who have this Fitzpatrick 6 skin type, they're literally adapted to high UV index the whole year round in the beating sun. Same with the Australian Aborigines. But the someone whose parents and ancestors were from Sweden, the
Hmm.
UV index doesn't gets above 6 for about a week, and then is never higher than that. So these are radically different ultraviolet environments, and therefore there's radically different tolerances to ultraviolet light. And I think we just need to respect that when it comes to making these choices. And again, if you're paler and you're starting from zero, then really it's you can start earlier in the day, and you can obviously avoid peak UV times, so you don't essentially push off from hormetic stress into potential damage. But yeah, look, the key point is that for so long this message has been demonizing sun exposure, when for so many people the beginning of their healing journey from chronic disease would start by taking off their clothes, literally taking all their clothes off, and gently starting with morning sun exposure, and essentially cultivating pigment, developing that POMC, building it up, and that they'll start thriving. The path to thriving begins there.
That's awesome. And the taking all your clothes off, big fan. I want to maybe next time you come on, we can break down what that's doing for the body. And I hate to rush you off, but we're gonna have a classic mid-afternoon thunderstorm here in Florida. So, but I really
No worries.
appreciate you coming on. You're awesome. You have such a great wealth of knowledge. So where can people find you? And I'd love for you to talk about your health retreat and what that's all about as well.
Yeah, so we more recently I've run a couple of these health retreats. It's circadian living, we call it, and the thrust of it is it's easier to show someone what to do than to kind of intellectually for them to study it. And what that looks like is we run people through an ideal circadian day. We're up at sunrise, we're seeing the sun come up, we're doing some movement, sometimes we're getting cold. We're using those circadian cycles to help entrain our circadian rhythm. We're eating nutrient dense breakfasts, and early dinners, not eating late, not eating after the sun sets, respecting the natural light cues, and really kind of tying that all in with a relaxing weekend, meeting a whole bunch of like-minded people. And that's
Mhm.
something we really found, is that people loved meeting other people who are into this thing, because it can be isolating and a little bit uh I guess alienating if you feel like you're the only one doing weird, weird in inverted commas things like
Definitely.
taking your clothes off and
Yeah.
sunbathing. But yeah, you can hit me up on Instagram on Max Gulhane MD or X, and my website is drmaxgulhane.com.
Awesome, Max. Thank you so much. This is awesome. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brett.